Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be the host over the next half hour's program. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Bill Rainey, President, West Virginia Coal Association, and we're going to be talking about a host of issues surrounding the coal industry. We'll ask Bill give us an up-to-date status of what all's going on, and maybe through that we'll have a glimpse of what the future holds for coal. Bill, thanks for coming by.
Well, I appreciate being here, Chris, as always.
Appreciate you taking time. You're a regular on the show. It seems like every couple, 3 months you come by and give us and the viewing audience, just a little insight as to what all's going on. Seems like there's a lot going on as usual. The Clean Power Plan is still out there. It's being stayed right now.
It is.
Thanks to a favorable Supreme Court decision. But that's still out there looming over the future of coal and coal mining.
And led by our Attorney General, as a matter of fact, in 26 other states. I mean, had Patrick Morrisey not taken the initiative, we probably wouldn't have a Supreme Court stay. So it's compliments to him, but as well as the 26 states that joined up with him. So I think that's pretty important when you have all those states go to the Supreme Court and say that. So it tells you that, perhaps we are doing something right here, and they recognize that the Obama administration's overstepped their bounds here with this Clean Power Plan. Hopefully it'll stick, and we won't have to deal with that because it's created such uncertainty. It'd be nice not to have to deal with that.
A lot of people think that, and you hear it, I hear it, a lot of people think that even if, the legal challenge is productive and prevails, and ultimately the Clean Power Plan as we know it does not go forward, it appears that there's still going to be pressure from a public policy standpoint going forward to deal with CO2 emissions out of the consumption, burning of fossil fuels.
Well, that's still, it seems to be a topic that everybody wants to talk about, and everybody says, not everybody, but a goodly portion say the science is settled. And of course, as you know, we don't necessarily agree with that because we can find a certain number of scientists who don't agree with that. And I think what they really need to do, as I've suggested so many times, is the scientists need to really take a look at the cost-benefit and come to West Virginia or any of the coal-producing states in Appalachia and see the negative impact that the suggestion that this power plant and the CO2 control and all the discussions for the last 8 years have had on the employment picture and what it's done to the families of Appalachia. And I suggest that if you shut down every coal-fired plant in America tomorrow, it would have a negligible, almost invisible impact on anything. But yet it's just ripping the guts out of Appalachia and the families here.
Well, you can go in a couple different directions with that whole issue. As you were talking, one of the things that jumped out at me is, the reduction required, or the cost-benefit analysis of ratcheting down our CO2 emissions here within the United States and the total devastation it does to coal and our industrial fabric. For such a little reduction in world emissions. China still, and the whole, region of China produces and consumes 7 or 8 times what we do.
Right.
And even though there's some, their economy has slowed here over the past year, they're still consuming and producing a lot of coal, a lot of fossil fuels.
They are, and we want them to buy more West Virginia coal, and we want India to buy more and Germany to buy more, and we certainly want to export as much as we possibly can. Looked at the EIA numbers this morning, and for the first 8 weeks of this year, West Virginia's production is off about 33%. And if you look at what we did last year, it was about 105 million tons. Then that means you're in that 65 to 70 million ton production, and that's devastating for West Virginia. They're seeing it in the budget the price is down, the volume of production's down, so severance tax receipts are suffering. And that's one of the big components of creating this deficit for the budget. And it doesn't look like it's going to get appreciably better in the near term in terms of volume. We hope the price comes up and we're seeing more trains move and barges move. And we're seeing people hire back a few people in very specific mines where they have a niche market. But overall, as you know, Chris, we've lost somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 employees over the last 8 years. And that's huge. Whether you use a multiplier of 3 or a multiplier of 11, depending upon how close you are to the operation, the economy, it really suffers. And it's sad in the coalfield counties of West Virginia today.
So we're down 60, 65 million tons of production, 8, 9, 10,000 direct jobs. I believe I heard Eugene White give a presentation to the legislature, and he said that we are, if I'm correct, I believe he said that we are below 100 mines now for the first time since the state has been keeping records of active mining operations, total production, and employees.
Right.
I believe he said 53 underground mines that are operating in the state.
Yeah,
that's astonishing.
Oh, it is. It's shocking. And, you know, having spent our lives in the industry to watch it dismantle in such a rapid fashion under this administration in Washington is so disappointing. It's disheartening. But the impact that it's having on the families in the coal-producing counties is just atrocious. And so we're hopeful that, you know, the 30% of the electricity, 32% of the electricity that they say will continue to be made by fossil fuels, meaning coal, that we've got to have a goodly share of that. So we've got to get our costs down, as we talked about during the legislative session, of trying to reduce the severance rate. And of course, it's a terrifically difficult time to talk about reducing taxes when you've got the kind of deficit that the state's dealing with. But the whole idea was looking way forward and trying to get ourselves in a position where we're competitive with the states of Illinois and Indiana and Pennsylvania, who do not have a severance tax. And as you well know, Chris, the people that run these operations they've done everything they possibly can by cutting to the absolute bone on efficiencies. I mean, they've laid people off, they've cut expenses, they've done everything they can at the operation level. And what they have to do now is look at fixed cost, and severance tax, of course, is the one that is the most evident. So we got to work with the legislature. We got to try to study this, make sure they have the proper numbers, and understand that the impact is probably not as great as what one initially thinks to reduce that rate, but it may really be advantageous in the future to keep us in the market so that we can sell more coal at a better price.
Well, I know there were some pretty sophisticated models and analysis run by Price Waterhouse, and I think when you look at the cost to the state, when you reduce severance from say 5 to 4%, and then from 4 to 3, and you factor in the jobs that would be lost, the loss of income if you do not lower that severance, plus you then have to draw on unemployment benefits as well. So the cost of the state is almost, there's a trade-off there.
There is.
When you look at the economics of lowering or not lowering the severance tax.
Well, the numbers that worked out, again, using the M-Plan model that Price Waterhouse used, is if you reduce the severance rate from 5% to 4%, you would save about 650 jobs. 115 of them would be direct coal mining jobs. And when you do the multiplication of what those jobs are paid, and that money would, if you didn't save those jobs, they wouldn't go into the economy. And then you look, as you say, at the unemployment. Those people will not be filing for unemployment, so you compute that. All of that works down to the matrix at the bottom, indicates that for about $32,000, you can reduce the severance rate by 1%, and that would be the impact. And we think if we went to the state and said that would you invest $32,000 to save 650 jobs, that sounds like that'd be a pretty good deal in today's economy in particular.
No doubt.
But we got to be sure everybody understands that, and it's certainly not it's not as great a hindrance to the revenues of this state as what one first thought.
Well, you clearly have what all characterizes a forced conversion that's taken place out there. I mean, due to public policy, previous versions, if you will, or programs like the Clean Power Plan with the utility MAC and CASPER. The states across this country are doing what they can to lower their carbon footprint.
Right.
So you have a forced conversion that's taken place, and it seems like it's hitting your primary energy and coal-producing states disproportionately.
Oh, I think it is. I mean, there's no question. The uncertainty that's been created by the suggestion of the federal government. You know, it's so frustrating because America has more coal than any other country in the world. And you don't see Saudi Arabia trying to get rid of its oil industry. And it's unconscionable that the federal government would not do everything possible to use the most prolific resource that we have, particularly when we're here in West Virginia with the best coal miners and the best coal reserves. But all of this talk about CO2 and getting away from fossil fuels in favor of renewables, which are not dependable and terrifically expensive, has created uncertainty in the financial community, and of course that creates uncertainty throughout the country, and it's taken its toll here in West Virginia.
It also seems like it's some point in the future, and maybe this ought to be, maybe we ought to have this quantified, but there appears that there will be a natural transition time, because coal is a finite resource.
Right.
You know, it's not going to be around forever. I have seen estimates of maybe another 100 years, maybe 150 years. In historian timelines, that's not very long. I mean, this coal was formed millions of years ago, and to think there's only 100 years left suggests that we're going to have to accelerate replacement of that fuel somewhere down. It's not today, but
No.
30, 40 years from now, you know, if there's only 30, 40, 50 years left of coal, then you have to start a transition phase to and you know, as you well know, there's no form of energy production of large economic scale to replace low cost fossil fuel electricity today.
Nothing is dependable. You know, we've got windmills in places in the state where the wind blows, and I think some people are using solar panels on their roofs, but you know, it's not dependable enough in West Virginia here in the east to do that. You might be able to use windmills out in the plains, where it's flat and the wind blows all the time, or out in the desert with the solar panels.
Doesn't replace what they say base load generation.
That's right.
You know, it doesn't replace, you know, coal that's used around here on the order of magnitude of 90+%.
Yeah, I can just imagine, you know, if you depended on wind and solar all the time, the public outcry when they got home in the evening and wanted to turn their computer on and the wind wasn't blowing, it'd be somebody's fault. I don't know exactly who they'd blame, but it'd probably be us before it was over with. But, you know, the dependability of using fossil fuels, and particularly coal, and the guys that run the plants, the 10 plants here in the state, say, you know, they prefer to have a coal plant. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they got a stockpile. They know how much inventory they've got. They know where to go. They know they can unload it. They know how much is there and how many days of generation they've got. So it's very, very dependable. And I tell you what, we're pretty good at burning it too, because they've removed almost all the emissions.
I tell you, that's the thing. You know, when you go by the John Amos plant or any of the plants, the Mitchell plant up north or Mountaineer plant, what you see coming from that plant today is basically water vapor and steam.
Right.
I mean, it appears to be a cloud,
Yeah.
but it's purely water vapor.
Yeah, I think it's like your grandson said, it's a cloud machine, but you know, a lot of people think it's got things in it, but it truly is, as you say, steam coming out of the cooling towers. And they've cleaned almost all the emissions up, but what the federal government does is goes out and figures out these constituents that have not been cleaned up, can't be cleaned up under the technology such as CO2, but yet we're exhaling CO2. The plants need CO2. We absorb more CO2 with our hardwood forests than we emit in this state. EPA won't give us credit for that. I mean, it's an absolute assault on the Appalachian states of this country. And it's a real shame because we truly built the country through the Industrial Revolution, or the folks that came before us did. And we have plenty of coal left, as you mentioned. The geologists say we got at least 50 years, and some think more. We're mining coal today that nobody thought 30 years ago they could mine.
That's right.
So technology is going to be advanced to the point that we'll be able to recover coal that we didn't think was mineable.
Well, it's just not realistic to think that coal is going to be totally displaced. You know, I think even the Federal Energy Administration predicts that there will be, over the next 50 years, 30%, 35% of coal that's burned to generate all the electricity we need.
Right.
So I guess the real questions then emerge, you know, where will that coal come from? You know, and will West Virginia be able to compete and account for the appropriate percentage of that coal?
Well, that's our challenge, you know, and that's why we got to get our costs down so we can compete with the coals that come out of the Midwest and even to the north, Pennsylvania coals. And the market is so sensitive from a price standpoint that we've got to do everything we can to get our fixed cost down. And as we say, and as we preach for 60 days, the severance tax is really out of step here in West Virginia. It's been great. There was no intention of affecting the county share by reducing anything. As a matter of fact, need to adjust that and look at it because the coal-producing counties are changing. The ones that have been historically large coal-producing counties are no longer leading the pack. So we got to look at all of that, and we've been given a year now to take a look at it and go to the next session of legislature and hopefully be looked upon favorably to get that rate down so that we truly can compete and have a 12 to 13, maybe even a 16% part of what the nation's needs are from the coal industry.
I'm sure you're asked a lot. I hear it asked a lot. You know, are we at bottom? Is the bottom in sight? You know, we're down 10,000 jobs, maybe even more. We've lost over a third, perhaps as much as 40% of our state's production. You know, lowest number of mines ever recorded is what we have in place out here today. At some point that will likely plateau, and you know the losses slow, if not, you know, be reversed somewhat.
Yeah, we hope we're at the bottom. I mean, there's no way of knowing for sure, but you know, when you listen to the numbers, you got to believe that you're close to the bottom. And it's sad in these coal-producing counties now that some of which don't even have an operating coal mine. And when you see the downstream effect in the economy, it's disturbing. We're seeing teachers laid off. We're seeing the economic impact being very, very dramatic in the coal-producing counties.
Very important services out there being discontinued or slowed.
And you know, we'd like to think you could build a coke extraction plant in West Virginia to take coal and get all the byproducts that are used everywhere. You can't get those kind of plants permitted with the federal EPA anymore. And but diversification of the economy, absolutely. We're looking at post-mining land uses. But we've got a whole mess here in terms of great coal miners who want to work. And then you got the federal government announcing today, for instance, that they're going to send a bunch of money down here to retrain them. And you know, all the guys and gals that we talk to don't want to be retrained. They want to work in the coal mine doing what they're so very good at. And that, you know, it's absolute height of hypocrisy for the federal government, who's worked for 8 years to take their jobs, to now try to send money down to make them beholden to them. So it's, you know, it's very, very sad to see that happen. And the economy, Chris, is just not very good. We need to start making things. I mean, we need a Ravenswood aluminum back so that it absorbs a whole lot of electricity. We need that kind of manufacturing where you're doing something that value adds. And we're able to do that because you take coal coming out of the ground, you make electricity or steel out of it. But we need more manufacturing that are big consumers of electricity so that we're able to, you know, make good, low-priced, reliable electricity in West Virginia and send it all over the country here.
John Deskins, who heads up the Bureau of Business and Economic Research at Western University,
Right.
concluded a study last year, and he indicated in his conclusion that West Virginia's production should begin to plateau about where we are, about 80, 85 million tons of production, and then maybe show some growth you know, over the next 20, 30 years if we're able to effectively compete. And a couple things strike me there. First of all, you know, when you're in this period that we're in, where you have all this loss occurring, and it's occurring at just a real accelerated pace, almost unprecedented, the number of layoffs and
Right.
and the number of mines that have gone by the wayside here over just the past couple of years. But looking ahead a couple years from now, if in fact we are at bottom, and if in fact we are able to show some growth, the economy recovers nationally, China's economy and other places where we export a lot of coal show improved economies. When you look at an industry, you know, at that size, 75, 80 million tons, maybe up to 100 million tons,
Right.
and get past all the hurt and pain that's being experienced today, that will still be a major economic engine for the state at 80
clearly.
million tons.
Yeah, it really will. I mean, you start doing the math and figure that hopefully coal will be selling for steam coal at $50 to $60 a ton, and metallurgical coal for $80 to $90 a ton, and you do that math and it's a substantial amount. Then you figure out that coal miners make somewhere between $70,000 and $100,000 a year, depending upon overtime and other things. It's an enormous amount of churning of dollars in the local economy. But just the pure severance tax coming from that stable amount of 80 million tons is a huge, huge component of the state's general revenue budget.
I don't want to understate the pain that people are experiencing today, because we're in a real crisis, and you know, as you indicated, it's the families, you know, and the mother of 3 or 4 that, you know, with a son in college and you know, 2 teenagers, and she's trying to fix a home, you know, trying to fix the home budget and prepare for the future. I mean, they're just really in a crisis mode.
Well, and you're right. I mean, crisis is the right word for it, and that's why the federal officials who are making this policy need to come down here and truly see the pain that's being inflicted because of the policies and just the comments that they make. You know, one of the candidates this week just talked about you know, they're going to get rid of coal miners, which makes no sense to me. I don't know why anybody would suggest that, you know, we want to take another person's job. And But that's happening. It's happened for 8 years, and we have got to somehow get them to do a benefit cost and take a look at this and how important this industry, the coal industry, is to this country and the sustainment of low-priced, predictable, reliable electricity.
You hear a lot of people saying we need to diversify the economy and not rely so much on